Hi, everyone. I think we'll maybe just give a minute or two for everyone to come in, but welcome. We are so excited to get started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Amouyel. Delighted to be here today.
All right, well, maybe let's go ahead and get started because I'm really excited for the conversation. So welcome, everyone. I'm sure others will trickle in as well, but I'm Sona. I am CEO and co-founder of Neopenda, and I am so excited and honored to be here with Alex Amouyel today, and we're excited to share more about her book, The Answer Is You. I first met Alex a few years ago now. I was fortunate to be a solver team that Alex was leading. And so it was a pleasure to meet her both in person and virtually. And she's been such an inspiring force for good for many years and has continued to have a strong relationship with all of her solver teams. So very fortunate to be here. Alex, as many of you may know, she's well renowned in the space of impact and has a wealth of knowledge that she has graciously shared with us in her book. Prior to being at MIT Solve, she was at Clinton Global Initiative, Save the Children, has worked all over the world. And again, she's shared a lot of her insights from her experience. So super excited to be interviewing her today and learning more about her experience. Alex, anything you want to share to start off?
Thank you so much for this kind introduction, and thank you for everybody for joining, and thank you also to Barbara's Bookstore for putting on this virtual event, and for also giving a discount to people if they purchase the book.
Yeah. Barbara's Bookstore is incredible. I'm based here in Chicago, and so it's always amazing to just see the incredible work that local bookstores are doing as well. And I'm so glad that they're featuring Alex today. I moved to Chicago about 6 years ago, and I find that it's been such a wonderful city for both impact and entrepreneurship. And so a lot of the themes and messages that Alex has talked about in her book are things that resonate with me, and hopefully the Chicago community and ecosystem can benefit from them as well. So excited to get started. Awesome. Well, the first question, it'll be kind of a very fluid Q&A type. So I'll go ahead and get started with a few questions, but for anyone in the audience, feel free to type a question in the chat or ask a question. I'll be sure to read those out so that we can get Alex to answer your questions as well. But maybe first off, Alex, do you want to talk a little bit about what the book is about and what you want people to remember after reading the book?
Super, thank you, Sona. So the book is called The Answer Is You, a guidebook to creating a life full of impact. And I guess a corollary to the title, The Answer Is You, and everyone needs to and should get involved could be the corollary. But essentially, it's trying to help people step by step, chapter by chapter, see themselves as change makers in their community in the world, and showing people how we and everyone can take action, can use what I call your superpowers to do good in the world and help you think through that. That doesn't mean you need to quit your day job, you need to change your whole life immediately. I'm trying to give you a few key easy steps to get started as you go through this. And while the book is sort of my advice and some frameworks on how you could think about that, I didn't want it to be just my perspective. So I interviewed 21 change makers, activists, social entrepreneurs from all around the world, to ask them how and why they got started, what they struggled with, what advice they had for people young and old. And so throughout the book, it sort of alternates between their stories as illustrations and my advice and frameworks. So I hope you get out of it good advice, but also you really fall for some of the incredible people featured in this book.
Yeah, I think that was one of the most impactful things for me reading through the book was just seeing the stories of friends and colleagues that were featured in the book. And it's just incredible to hear their stories because you don't always get to hear their backgrounds or, you know, what they are struggling with or how they got started. And so it was really incredible to kind of weave that through throughout the book. And so I really appreciated that. Thanks, Alex, for adding that in. You start off the book with a large focus and emphasis on superpowers. And really being able to identify what superpowers are. So I've got a couple of questions around that. From personal experience, I think superpowers can change over time. You know, I don't necessarily know, I didn't know what they were before, and I'm still figuring out what my superpowers are along my journey, but I'm curious to hear, what are your superpowers?
Well, thank you for that question. And yeah, in the book, just to define what I talk about superpowers, I sort of start the first chapter saying, you know, before you get started, don't jump into a solution or don't even jump into a problem. Go and jump into yourself a bit more. And I use this quote from Roomie at the beginning of the chapter, which said, yesterday I was young and I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise and I want to change myself. And so it's a reflection on that and really thinking through what you can bring to this problem solving table, what you can bring in terms of your skills, your lived experience, even the bad stuff that has happened to you, your trauma, all these different perspectives, and how you can, as a result, what you can bring, ideally what you can uniquely bring, your talent, your ingenuity, your creativity, because that's what we need overall. And then, you know, chapter 2 is about defining problems. And then chapter 3 is seeing about the intersection of your superpowers, and these problems is what creates your purpose. So that's just sort of as a definition. And in terms of my superpowers, I do think that they evolve and change over time. But I think in my current role, certainly people would probably say that I'm a pretty incredible connector and that I'm able to connect, you know, innovators from across the world to funders, to technical experts, to different pieces like that. And I keep probably quite a lot of things in my head, and a lot of relationships and people, and trying to see how I can help different people connect and succeed in. And you know, some of this is about helping people get money and funding. Some of this is helping people get mentorship. I think probably the other superpower I have is getting things done, which is still very important, be it writing a book during a pandemic or in general, sort of moving projects from A to B to C to D in the right order. So that's probably at the moment my superpowers. But I think they do change over time, and like everything we can, while I sort of lay out the steps of the book linearly, I think that, you know, finding your purpose is probably a lifetime search as well, right? That you're constantly refining your superpowers and the problems, and you're hopefully constantly veering in the right direction, more and more aligned to your purpose. But I do think for many people in the book, some of their purpose emerged pretty violently and immediately because maybe something that affected them personally or their family or somebody they knew, and it was indeed in some cases extremely violent, meeting that problem, if you will, versus some people it really took years and years of trying different things and veering between activism and multilateral institutions and sort of going back and forth and not quite fitting, feeling a bit like a square peg in a round load. And then after years, it does come together for them. So it's not also to say that these steps, unfortunately, you can read the book and straight away it's going to change everything for you.
Yeah. And I love that you started out with the quote from Rumi. I remember when I was first getting involved in international development work, I graduated with an engineering degree and had a job lined up in pharma, but thought, why not do something a bit different before joining a pharmaceutical company? And so I went to Kenya, and I was a teacher out there. Nothing to do with my engineering background, but I think I had this. Maybe it's an American philosophy, but maybe I'll give Americans more credit than than we deserve. But I went into this school thinking that I could change everything, right? Change the things that needed to be changed. And I walked away after several months of being there thinking, wow, I don't know that I had any impact on on this school, but what it did do was change my philosophy on everything I knew about the world. There were so many things that I took for granted growing up. If the hot water didn't come out quickly enough, then I was upset. And so there were just lots of things that I started to think about. And so that quote certainly resonated with me. And the superpowers is definitely something that has been a journey for me over time as well. Continuing on with kind of thinking about superpowers, I know your focus was hopefully, they're unique superpowers. And I think there's a whole host of different superpowers that people can have. Are there common things that you find in entrepreneurs? Are there common superpowers that you can identify in all of the entrepreneurs that you've worked with?
So, and by the way, both the book, there's a lot of social entrepreneurs in the book, but I also interview people who are activists, who work at foundations, who are change makers in other ways. And I don't want to say to change the world and have an impact, you have to be an entrepreneur, and especially in the classical sense of starting something new. Many of the steps is more about looking what's out there already, seeing if you can actually work for or volunteer for existing, not reinvent the wheel and other things. I think traits that are coming to, I talk a little bit about that in the conclusion of traits that I think are important for the problem, what I call the problem solving mindset. And that's sort of through chapter 9, and things that you can always, wherever you come from, but indeed your superpowers will be your own, but there are traits of the problem solving mindset that you can sort of work on and that will be good for anyone, no matter your superpowers. I named 5 of them. I now have to remember exactly what I talked about in that one, so it's embarrassing. But the first one, I remember the first one, so that's the good news. The first one is about starting with optimism, and that indeed you really need to, you can't do this work if you don't stop with the view that the challenges can be solved and there's a way forward and that you're going to persevere no matter what. Then I talk about listening and being able to really listen. And Kevin Adler, which is a dear friend who works with unhoused neighbors, people experiencing homelessness in San Francisco, talks about widening your aperture, as in the aperture of a camera. And so really trying to have that broader perspective. The third one is about building relationships with real proximity and empathy. And I talk about proximity quite a bit as well, of how the problem, if you're not experiencing, you or your family or community are not experiencing that problem yourselves, which is, okay, in some cases people have faced that problem themselves, but if you're not, how are you meaningfully involving people who are experiencing the problem in the solution, and how are you really meaningfully becoming proximate? And Dr. Angela Jackson, which is also somebody who's featured in the book, has written a really great article with John Kenyon and Tulane Montgomery on proximate leadership and why that's important. So that's sort of the third one. The fourth one is about co-travelers and partners, and in a sense, again, one of Rebecca Obunu from MIT says, the superhero is the collective. So you might have superpowers, but you yourself are not the superhero, and you cannot do it alone. And thinking through really what the complement, like, even if it's not on your team, as in you employ them or you work with them, but really understanding where you fit into that stakeholder ecosystem is important. And then finally, the one which is a bit more radical, maybe, is saying build your own problem solving table, and one that is just and equitable. And that sometimes, and this is also something I discuss in chapter 6, is sometimes the problem, you don't have a seat at the problem solving table, and we need to change that. And we need sometimes, and Edgar Villanova talks about building a whole new table, one where we all belong, basically. But sometimes it's very difficult, but you're working in the system, and sometimes you're trying to dismantle the system at the same time. And that's a lot of what chapter 6 might be about. So those are the 5 things that I conclude at the end are run throughout. But in general, yes, it's sort of seeing what makes you unique and really leaning into that is also the broader message.
Yeah, and all 5 of those definitely resonate with me. One of the struggles that I have is in being an entrepreneur based in Chicago, but all of our work is overseas in Africa. And even when I go to Kenya, I'm unfortunately not Kenyan. As much as I'd like to consider myself Kenyan, I'm not. And so we think a lot about what does that proximity look like, and how do we make sure that we're immersing ourselves in the culture and the community that we are building and designing technologies within for. Do you have any advice for entrepreneurs that might, or change makers more broadly, that are not based physically in the regions that they're in? Do you have any advice in terms of travel, or how to be seeking the right relationships and partnerships, and making sure that we are building an inclusive community for the community that we're serving?
Yeah, sure. And I see Dr. Angela Jackson in the chat. So I'm so hi, and hi to everyone also who's there. But also happy that I was quoting you earlier if you saw that. But I think it is, yeah, I don't think I think it's perfect. I think one has to be careful, obviously, and I'm going to be glib here, but showing up and as a idealistic 20-year-old or however 60-year-old, and at any age, and showing up in Africa or in Roxbury, Massachusetts, or anywhere, and going like, I'm going to fix everything, I'm going to save the world, I've decided, I've just decided that I can fix the education system in this country, or the healthcare system in this country, whatever country it is. So obviously I don't advise that. And that is a lot of the beginning part of the book, of really sort of listening and learning and understanding problems and understanding yourself and understanding also your shortcomings and your privilege and the complicated dynamics of the social impact world and why other solutions have failed. And at the same time, I don't believe that it's always the case that, say, if indeed you work primarily in Kenya and you're not Kenyan, that doesn't mean that you can't add value either on this. But I think it is this concept overall of proximity, and then what and I'm saying a little bit too many buzzwords probably, but sort of co-design and co-creation of how are the solutions you're implementing top down, or is there real involvement and meaningful involvement of the community, and who are you employing, and how are you designing this? And as you go through this, how do you implement solutions that more and more bottom up, and where, as a person involved, you again are contributing the things that make the most sense for you and your superpowers. And that could be facilitation of a process around bottom up co-design. It could be that you're really good at fundraising. It could be that as an engineer you have real knowledge around that, and all those things are very valuable in the process. And but I also think that both the concept of proximity is really important, and sort of expanding your vision of what your team is, and who you're working with, to ensure that that you're, as a result, the solutions you're bringing forth will be, it's not enough to like really thinking through all the steps of how the solution is going to solve the problem makes sense versus like, oh, we've just designed this great app or whatever it is, and not thinking about how it's going to be utilized and how people are going to charge their phones, and if it's in the local language, and what about if people can't read, and I don't know, things like that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And, you know, the theme of optimism is kind of pervasive throughout the book, because you're absolutely right that impact starts with all of us. And when I think about optimism, I can't lie, there are certainly days when I wake up and it seems like it's an impossible mountain to climb. So keeping that optimism can be challenging. And you talk about contradictions and paradoxes that exist in this realm of impact. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how you've maintained optimism throughout your many journeys, which I'm sure have included challenges that seem insurmountable.
Absolutely. And sometimes, you know, it goes up and down. Sometimes I'm not so optimistic about the world at large. I guess especially on a day like today, in the US at least, but also on sort of my ability to change things and things like that. But in general, I still take an optimistic view, and I think it's the only way forward to get out of bed and do something. But I also think we want to have this critical eye, and this is what chapter 6 attempts to do, on these contradictory, and it's called Wrestle with Your Kryptonite and the Impact Paradox. And the impact paradox, as I try and define it, is this vision that you often have to enter the system, compromise with the system, work with the system, while you're trying to change its unfair rules / potentially try to dismantle it entirely. Yeah. Or how another one of my friends, Katie from the African Visionary Fund, used to say, how do you play the game and change the game at the same time? And you know, there's a lot of questions which come up in that for people working in the social impact space, and even when you're volunteering, and even when you're giving money away or investing, doing things like impact investing, these paradoxes can come up. And so yesterday, when I was chatting with a social entrepreneur, chef Dan Budd, from who created during the pandemic something called Red Hook Responds, which is about helping give free meals to elderly people who couldn't cook during the pandemic for various reasons, maybe first responders or people taking care of other people. You know, some of the paradoxes, well, is giving free food away, that's good for the short term, but what about the long term? And who do we take money from, and who do we partner with to do that? And there are many other, you know, should you work in countries which are not democracies? Should you take money from, let's say, a fossil fuel company? And in some cases, people are going to decide, no, that's where my red line is. And in some cases, people say, no, this is how we can engage this fossil fuel company on a climate agenda to change what it is. I think a lot of those decisions are ultimately personal, but they're almost every day, I feel, certainly when I'm talking to different people, there's an element of that comes through in terms of having to navigate these dynamics. And I think being able to do that with just the best understanding you can, and then nuance, and accepting that you won't always get it right, and accepting that you've got to try is the only way to go. But those are things that and then the last thing is that in that you also bring your own, you know, the social impact world has its own shortcomings, and you also bring your own shortcomings your own biases and your own privilege and your own and again, the more self-aware you can be in entering those conversations, the better you might be.
Yeah, that's very helpful to think about. I know there are certainly prizes and competitions that we've applied to, and maybe people don't love our idea, but they were female engineering founders, and so it's this weird balance of, do people really think that we are the people to make the change, or the company is the one to make the change? But I always find it interesting, just if we are selected to win something, just what was the reasoning behind it, or why did we place first over the other people that are equally incredible, if not more. So in chapter 3, you talk about kind of the intersection of your superpowers and the ability to affect millions. One of the challenges that I think entering into the impact space is thinking about how you are just one person. How can you actually have the change that you're looking for, especially when there are large organizations, WHO, UNICEF, Save the Children, many of the ones that you've worked for before, that have the ability to actually influence policy and other things that can make change. But as you as an individual, how can you actually make that change happen? Which I know is a whole book. So
yeah, it's a whole book. And at the same time, I think one of the messages is certainly that you have more power than you think. And I don't want to betray that, there's still, most people in the world today don't have the choice with what they do with their waking hours, and they're still living under $2 a day. They might be refugees, they might live with disabilities, and ultimately they don't have the choice with how they live their life and dedicate their life. But I'm guessing most of the people who are going to buy this book or are able to listen to the talk have a little bit of choice with what they do with their waking hours. And it might not be that they can quit their job and sort of go, I'm going all out and volunteering or going to work for a nonprofit. But if in chapter 4, I sort of ask you to think about an impact balance sheet, and to think about all aspects of your life. So yes, your career and your job, but also your giving, your purchasing decisions, your investments, your family relationships, your community relationships. If you're a member of an institution such as a university, a church, a religious organization, and through all of those parts of your life, those are levers that you can have power and influence over in big and small ways. And I sort of show examples of student divestment campaigns and other things where individuals did in the end, have big impact on at least the dollars that their endowments were using. And so thinking through that, where in your life can you start moving that needle, even by 10%, is what I say in chapter 5, is start by 10% of your time and money. But starting with some of these levers and starting will get you started. And yes, some of these things might be small, but there's lots and lots of evidence of, individuals or group of individuals banding together and, creating really big change. And also, I think that there's a virtual cycle of people, even at a small individual level, inspiring other people, members of their family, members of their community, to also do small things. And that partly, again, this idea, the answer of you and everybody needs to get involved, is as everybody gets involved, the world, and I know this might sound very idealistic, but the world becomes a kinder, better place where we measure success through the acts of good we do in the world. And that's just by and by a really lovely, virtuous circle in the end. And so and the last thing I say is, whether or not your impact is deep or broad is something to think about, and it doesn't matter, right? You can, it might be that you change one person's life and for the better, and that change is still extremely meaningful, obviously, for that one person, but even more broadly in the world versus, in some cases, these big multilateral institutions will issue a policy paper that, yes, might be read by a whole bunch of experts, and that ultimately changes policy in a country or several countries, and that has an impact on millions of people. But that whether or not that broad change, I wouldn't want to say that the breadth of change is, I'm sort of losing my words, but the breadth of change is one thing, but the depth of change is obviously just as meaningful, more meaningful in some cases. So I would say go and affect one person deeply to begin with, or your community in meaningful ways. And it's okay if you're not on the world stage like Greta Thunberg, inspiring children everywhere to care about climate, but also, great for Greta inspiring a whole movement and inspiring this next generation to really demand change on climate.
Yeah, and I think that actually goes into one of the audience questions really nicely. Thank you for those who have put some questions. I'm going to take some audience questions first. From Alexandra, what's the main positive difference between working at assuming a smaller, more focused place like Solve versus Clinton Initiative?
Well, Solve is part of MIT, and MIT is a big place, and MIT is bigger than the Clinton Foundation by certainly by its endowment size and by the number of people it works at. But Solve itself is smaller than the Clinton Foundation, and I guess I'll also ask the question to Sona. Sona works with as a social entrepreneur, and also a smaller organization maybe than the Clinton Foundation. I think that it's, there's good and bad, right? But you're able to move faster, you're able to be more innovative, you're able to understand more what's going on across the organization. Sometimes it feels less siloed, sometimes it feels just as siloed, surprisingly, but I also think Julie Battellina, who's from Harvard, writes an article I quote in the book about, are you an agitator, an innovator, or an orchestrator? And understanding that all these roles are important in social change movements. And I would see, for example, Solve and my role at Solve as being an orchestrator. I'm still moving in the system of MIT and the system of social impact, connecting then innovators with funders and technical experts and other people, versus, when you're an innovator or an agitator, you might be a much smaller agent in size, and hopefully you can help move the system. But in the big organizations, if the system, it's the Titanic, but if the system does move, then you can have maybe that breadth of impact. So there's pros and cons, but I really like working at Solve. So. But I guess to your question, if you have thoughts, like what are your thoughts about working for smaller structures versus like the bigger behemoths?
Yeah, I think it goes back to one of the 5 traits that you mentioned at the end, is just the power of the collective. There's, we need both the large organizations who have influence and power in many ways that smaller organizations can't or don't have. But you need the small ones because we can be more nimble and agile, and there's a lot less bureaucracy in many cases. So I've worked in, a large corporate setting. And then now at Neopenda, we are a team of 8 people total. So we're a very small organization that is trying to, have change all over the world. And so I do see benefits of both. When I was in a large company, there's just a lot more power that the large company can have. People know the name. You're not coming in as a really small organization or as an individual trying to speak with the Ministry of Health, for example. There's just a lot more power in the dedication that many, many people have had at a large organization. So there's a lot of knowledge that's retained in that. But on the flip side, I can imagine myself being at anything different than a small organization, because our team is incredibly passionate about the work that we do, and we're able to, where we can't climb mountains, we're able to move them. And so I think we are able to think a little bit outside of the box. And I think in the impact space, it's common to become jaded on certain aspects, and not just get stuck in this phase of, well, that's how it's always been done, so that's how you have to do it. And I think particularly at small organizations, you're able to pressure test that. You're able to kind of move the needle a little bit, just because you don't have a choice but to figure out how to make it work. Otherwise, you don't exist as an organization anymore. As a large organization is able to kind of see failure a little bit better, because they're able to bounce back from it. Not that we don't fail frequently, we do, but we're able to kind of learn from it and bounce back from it in different ways than a large organization is able to kind of absorb that.
Yeah, and I do think what you raise is important of when you're in that sort of orchestrator position, if you're working for a bigger organization and trying to sort of move the mountain a bit, or move the system a bit, I think it is that tension of not becoming the system yourself, and sort of not sort of just being absorbed with this is never going to change, and I'm going to be okay with that. And sometimes it is harder being on the outside, as again, I'm using Julie Bertolina's framework here, not mine, the sort of innovator or the agitator. That there's more idealism, and there's more, but you still, in all these cases, in a sense, certainly Julie's point, and I 100% agree, is you can't really do anything without each other. All of these actors need each other, and sometimes you as a person will be not just one of those things. You can be, I don't know that you can be all three of those very well together, but I think you can, sometimes you wear several hats. So, and maybe that helps you do both things. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's another question as well in the chat.
Yeah, just one more thing on that before jumping into the other question there. I think it goes back to the superpowers and knowing what your personal superpowers are. For me, working at a larger company wasn't my superpower. I didn't perform my best. I wasn't my best in a large organization because I wasn't able to have the type of impact that I wanted to have. So I function much better at a smaller organization. So I think just knowing yourself and and it's okay to not know that initially. You can kind of work at a large organization, then transition to small, and then realize actually you really love large. So I think there's no right or wrong answer, but it all depends on kind of how you feel personally about the different areas. I would just encourage you to step out of what your norm is and experience something new, and that'll help you figure out what those superpowers are and what type of organization you want to be working with or for. Yes, another question. So thank you again for sharing the questions. So we've got a question for you, Alex. If you were a 16 to 18-year-old today at the start of your academic professional journey, what problems would you be most interested in studying or working on?
Well, at the time when I was 16 to 18, it was biochemistry and research science, and I thought I would rid the world of cancer. And that was an ambition that carried me to university and even to start a PhD. And I guess, like you, I realized that was not my superpower, at least doing the research work. So I did quit that PhD and then started doing a master's in international affairs after some soul searching. So first I would say, don't worry, you can get it wrong. It's absolutely fine. I think at least go try something and go learn from it as much as, learn about yourself and what you don't like, and learn about the problems of this world, and learn some skills, and all of these things will come in handy. So whatever it is, go do something and be, I wouldn't even say passionate, but like care about something enough that you want to try and go solve it, and think about indeed what at your young age, what can you learn from it. Today, if I went back, I guess my own mission in life, I think centers around equality of opportunity as a broad theme, and ensuring that everybody, no matter who they are, where they come from, and their gender, their race, their zip code, and so much more, they're able to realize their full potential. And that's extremely broad, obviously, and many people have taken pieces of that and specialize in very, in either educational inequality or health inequality or income inequality or whatever it is. I see all of those as very interrelated, and I see that I've done well and do best in fact when it is more at this general level. So I haven't particularly specialized in any of those. I know enough to be dangerous with them. So I think you can still, you can pick a very narrow topic, or you can sometimes stay broad as well. And so that's also something to consider. But yeah, now if I went back, I would probably think about that question still.
And it's always a journey, right? It's always, you talk about at the beginning, I think in chapter 2, about what's the problem. And many times the problems that you're trying to solve are the ones that you've experienced or you've had some kind of relationship with in the past. So certainly would recommend reading the whole book, but certainly that part of it to relate to that question. So we've got another question in here from Susanna. Thank you for this wonderful introduction to your book. What are the top 3 basic skills that a transformative leader or a collective need to have? Is it possible to identify these, and can these be extrapolated across different contexts?
Thank you, Susanna. And hello. Yes and no, I would say, because a large part of, indeed, the first part of this is identifying your unique superpowers and your skills and experiences and the life you've lived, and seeing how that fits in and how that makes you well placed to bring your own talent and potential and ingenuity to challenges. And I think that, I resisted. In fact, when I was starting to write this book, even sort of talking to agents and shopping it around, there was the sort of idea that there could be a listicle of the top 10 skills or whatever it was. This is the recipe book to become a hero, a social entrepreneur, versus really taking the particulars and saying that we do need that diversity of perspectives and of skills and experiences to do that. So I would resist the idea that there are 3 skills that make you best place and 3 recipes, that there's a recipe for this, versus really understanding yourself, understanding your superpowers, understanding the problems of this world, spending a lot of time on both of those things, finding that intersection, which is your purpose, recognizing your shortcomings and the shortcomings of the space and the world, and then moving forward optimistically. As mentioned, there is 5 traits that everybody can work on in chapter 9 of this problem-solving mindset, which are about optimism, real listening, proximity, building a team and sort of co-travelers, and really also like building your own problem-solving table, or sort of accepting that sometimes you have to step outside the box to really change the box, basically. So those are the 5 things I say everyone can work on, no matter who they are. But I think it really does start with your unique gifts.
Great. So I'm really interested in your progression of writing this book and thinking about what inspired you to write the book. So yeah, maybe let's start there. What was your inspiration for writing the book, and who do you think your audience is for this?
Great question. Well, right now the audience is you, um, and the answer is you as well. But I, I started. I had this idea for a few years, but I really started during the pandemic. So I did in the end have, in my case, quite a lot of spare time to be able to devote to this. Which in that sense was nice, and quite a lot of time to reflect on why I was doing things and why those things were important. But I think the sort of even prior to the pandemic, just as I've progressed in my career, people young, old, beginning their career, mid-career, nearing retirement, do often come to me, sort of saying, I want to have an impact in my life, either because they're starting out and they want to really build their career in that way, or because they might be a frustrated lawyer, or because as they're closer to retirement, they're really thinking about sort of legacy and public, giving back and public service. So it's just a question that I think comes up for people like me who have worked in the space, and I think that's a great question, because I think fundamentally every one of us does want to have a positive impact in the world. This is where I'm optimistic. And every one of us wants to live our purpose, and every one of us, would be happier and more fulfilled if one were living our purpose, and the world would be a better place if we all get to live our purpose. And so and I would give people answers and ask them what they were passionate about and what they would do. And often, but I didn't necessarily have a resource to point them to. So it's where I thought maybe I could capture everything I'm telling them. If there's no good book, I can point them to around that. But also, I think that sometimes there was enough misconceptions, I think, that indeed you had to work for a nonprofit, that indeed you had to quit your job, that you couldn't, you'd gone to law school, or you'd done marketing, and therefore you had no skills to contribute. Quite the contrary, I would say. That you couldn't have an impact, while working at a big corporation. There was enough, and also, when I would say, what I say in the book at some point is, people would have vague notions of, well, what do you want to do? You want to work in social impact, or you want to work on, education, but what exactly do you want to do? And they would say something very broad, like policy, and without really understanding what policy might be. And so, in the book, I talk about how that's similar to saying, I want to work in fashion, which I guess many people might say, but does that mean you want to be the seamstress? Does it mean you want to be working at Nike? Does it mean you want to launch your own line? Does it mean you want to be a model? There's thousands and thousands of jobs in fashion, and different roles, and understanding a little bit more what that means. And that's the same thing in social impact. There's lots of different roles, and you don't even have to have a job or a career in social impact to still have a positive impact. And so in that sense, I wanted to help those people, and I imagined a lot of other people. And when I see the statistics on Gen Zers and millennials, and how much they care about the environment, about income inequality, about the issue, and how they want to lead lives of purpose, work in organizations that care about social impact, purchase from brands that have real commitments, and live a different type of life, or a life that I think we do all aspire to in that way. I don't think it's just the young people, but you see that statistically much more. How can I contribute in helping anyone who does want to get started understand how they can get started, and understand, and also not have those misconceptions that it requires, it's so difficult, and I didn't study international relations at university, I can't do anything good with my life, it's too late.
Yeah, and I would just like to highlight that even if you kind of already started this journey, I would still highly recommend reading the book because there are so many nuggets out of it that I've applied, and I've been working in this space for 7 years now. So I do think that it's certainly really helpful for people that are interested in getting into this space. But even if you're there, there's so many things that you can learn from Alex and what she's written in the book. So on kind of the thinking a little bit about your journey with the book itself and kind of writing it and interviewing different folks, what do you think was most challenging about writing it?
I would say I mean, in a book, I think the writing is for me at least, the writing was the easiest part, and the interviewing the innovators was the most rewarding part for sure. And indeed, at some point, Tony said it was lovely discovering people you knew, but hearing their deeper story. That was the case for me too. Some of these people, even though I knew them and met them countless times or something like that, I had never sat down with them for an extending period of time and said, why do you do the work that you do? What was the most challenging parts? And, how do you get through that? What advice do you have? And so there are many interviews where I was, flabbergasted that I had known these people for years and I didn't know their story. So that was the most rewarding for sure. I would say the writing process was not or at least for me, it was easy. I think the book process is a challenging one overall. You have to get an agent, write a proposal, get rejected, resubmit a proposal, get rejected, resubmit some, get rejected, but some people say, oh, maybe if things were different. And so then you resubmit a proposal, find a publisher, sign a contract, finally get to write the book. But by that time, you've written so many proposals that you've already half written the book, and then edit and edit and edit, and and then like right before you're meant to send the final, find more things that are wrong with the copy edit, and then wait, and then there are supply chain issues, so then everything's delayed, and so you wait again, and now we're in sort of marketing the book and hopefully getting people to this book to find its audience. So that takes 2 or 3 years in well, I think at least 2 years. And I think I was perhaps naive in realizing how much of a production, and I'm very grateful to the people who helped me, my agents, my publisher Mango, the Barbara's bookstore, the people who are part of the team that keeps expanding, that are part of this journey to ensure this book's found its audience. So, but that's I think where it's I guess naively, like probably many authors, I just thought, oh yeah, I'll write this in my house and it will just then magically be a book and people will magically buy it. That's not the case. So,
well, that sounds like a challenge that maybe one of our audience members can take on and help simplify this seemingly very complex process of publishing.
I think and hope that in the end, it's a better book because it takes a lot of that, those steps were necessary and needed at various times. But yeah, it's similar to any big project you undertake. The fun parts are the easiest parts, and there's a lot of other stuff in between that you need to do to get it done. So, but in this case, I think obviously it's, as a first-time author, I didn't know any of this before starting, really. So I don't know. I'm happy to talk to anybody who has dreams of writing books. It's also a funny thing that you buy a lot of books about writing books when you're writing a book. So that's definitely a market which seems to be very solid. I think I bought like 5 books about writing books and I still underestimated what the process was in that way.
Was there anything that got edited out for various reasons that you wish to share with the audience today?
I'm thinking through it. There's so many edits. I should have Yeah, there's so many edits on the book that it's really hard for me to remember what ended up. And I reread this version so many times to make sure it was right. I think I think there's I can't think at the moment quite about this. I think there are many things I wanted to include that such a where in the end we run out of pages or run out of time. But there are many more people I could have interviewed, including yourself, Sona, and there were many more. I think there's many great stories that I wanted to include, and the balance between how to ensure these stories were that it wasn't what wouldn't have worked, I think, would just be sort of story after story after story, and just a compendium of portraits. And so finding how to weave my advice and these frameworks, but then find where the story was illustrative of the points. And I wasn't sort of looking for the stories to fit the narrative. I kind of interviewed everyone and then sort of worked my way back into this. So in that sense, like there's always more stories to tell, and some of those people's stories. And I guess I had grand designs that because I recorded the interviews, somehow it could be a podcast and but then obviously I didn't have all the right material. But creating a podcast is yet again another thing that I would totally think is underestimate the complexity of it. And so I have all the interviews recorded, but there's no way that that's quite at least right now. I'm not starting a podcast in any form. That's way too hard as well. So
cool. Well, I know we've got another audience question, so we're going to make sure that we get to that before we wrap up here. But you, Susanna, thank you for your second question here. You talk about the younger generations, but what about the older generations? How are you engaging with innovators and entrepreneurs in their later stages of their lives and or careers? We're going to have the greatest percentage of older people, 65 plus, in the world ever. What is their role in social transformation?
I think that's a great point, and I hope that the statistics I mentioned about Gen Z and millennials being this generation who really cares about impact and climate change and income inequality and other things, I think is a good thing for everyone, in the sense that I think they will inspire if they're successful, and I think they will be, they'll inspire every generation to care more and to think about that. And I do think that it's never too late and it's never too early to start. And indeed, as in later stages of your career, whether you're in the middle of your career or nearing retirement, you have a lot of, as you go through life, you tend to acquire more power and influence in the things that you do, be it through your career or your networks or the money that you may have, or the institutions you're part of, and being able to use that power and those levers of influence more and more towards positive impact, and being able to use you're honing your superpowers and you're gaining more skills and experience. So I really hope, and that this is not that it's not just the younger generations that are stepping up and stepping into the game, but that people of all ages, I think they are, but I hope more and more they are using their power and their skills. And there's a couple of examples definitely of people. Bob Harrison, who was the former CEO of the Clinton Global Initiative after spending his life at Goldman Sachs, is one of them. But there are a couple of others who really did start their journey in social impact, or what Bob calls public service in his case, much later in life, as a second career. And I think that's a perfectly valid and acceptable choice. But I also sort of, in that sense, I definitely think it's not an either or of, oh, I have to have this career and make money and then I can retire and do good sort of thing, as opposed to, again, even if it's just starting out with 10% at the point where you're at today, starting now and building that over time, and not seeing that as a dichotomy. And even when I was speaking to, for example, Bob, I can't remember if I did put this in the book, but I think I did, where he said, back in my day, I felt there wasn't as many options to have a career in social impact if it wasn't working for a nonprofit. And I think that may very well be the case. And he says now today, there's a lot more opportunities and a lot more different things you can do within that. So, who knows? I don't know if I don't want to speak for Bob, so I have no idea. But I think that it's not an either or. Just like, for example, this concept of impact investing, of instead of investing your money blindly through your 401k in the S&P 500, sort of being more intentional as to how you use your investment dollars to have either positive, neutral, negative impact in the world is also something where you can have power and influence. And again, these options, at least for retail investors, were not great back in the day, but more and more every day they are getting better. And the more people are buying into either ESG funds or even pro-impact funds, the more those funds are then created, because there's real customer demand. And there's also quite a lot of evidence that some of them may in fact perform better in some cases. So all of that, I think, is, as we're going through, we're getting more and more options for both younger generations and the older generations to have positive impact in the world.
What a beautiful note to end on here. So I just wanted to thank everyone in the audience for all of your thoughtful questions and just engaging with us today. Of course, thank you, Alex, for all of your advice and thoughts throughout the book. Everyone should go buy it. I've got it here and I plan on reading it over and over and over again. I know there's a 10% discount offered by attending this event. And of course, thank you, Barbara's Books, for allowing Alex to share her story and more about the book. So I think with that, thank you all so much again, and hopefully we'll see you all soon.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending. Bye.